deep dive mythology,
lore,
Dungeons and Dragons.
Hello and welcome
to the Creative Thinker Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Creative Thinker Podcast. My name is Henry Moon and I am joined by
Michael Vasquez.
We are in the throes of our crazy 2-day winter here in Texas. So as we batch record these episodes, it's a cold day here.
Sure is.
We are talking about creating new races for your fiction, for your D&D, anything where you have to create a new race, and race meaning like, elves or one already established, dwarves. We're going to be talking about elves. We'll be talking about
a dragonborn a little bit. So we picked like one fantasy race that you would see in literature, which is a very common race. We're talking about elves just for a little bit, and then we're just going to touch on dragonborn a little bit to hopefully get the creative juices flowing as we're talking about creating a new race. Then we're going to go through a series of questions on what you can do to answer or try and help, again, those creative juices flowing for
building your own race.
Yeah, building your own race. And then we will talk about our creation of Roween, answering some of those questions. Some of those questions are going to be pretty easy for us to answer because we've already created Roween. So we created the environment already.
Yeah, so we can definitely throw in... This is another Roween episode, so I'm really excited for that. Anytime we get to Roween, that means world building. So we're going to be... there is some stuff that we already have created. Visit the Roween playlist on YouTube if you want really easy access to all the videos that have Roween in them. This will be added to that as well. But yeah, I love world building, and I know we both do. So these episodes really pop.
Oh yeah,
and be doing a lot of pop in Roween. Anyway, so let's get to it.
Yeah, all right. So we're starting it off with our fantasy races. We're going to be talking about elves. First and foremost, one of the, I don't want to say oldest, I don't know, you tell me, what are elves? Are elves the oldest kind of fantasy creature that we have?
I mean, they're a very prevalent one. So it's like the ones that really have hung around for a long time. Elves are definitely appropriately one of the older races, humanoid races that we have in mythology. This is a Nordic myth as best as I can tell. There's definitely Germanic versions of this myth and Icelandic and in the UK as well. But where it seems to all travel back to is Nordic myth. So the Vikings, if you've never heard of them, were a seafaring...
Who are the Vikings? What is Nordic?
Barbaric tribe. And so they did a lot of exploration. They did a lot of like warring and... coming in and pillaging and things like that. Other cultures all around the world, they were great shipbuilders. So, a lot of their myths sort of traveled with them.
Okay.
So
I'm sure they probably in travel gained some other myths from other areas. And, if they're like the people that are like pillaging and stuff and going on exploration, like they're going to be taking, do they do slaves? Do you know? Do you remember?
Oh, Vikings? I'm sure they did.
Sure they did too.
Sure they did.
I'm sure they heard stories of different cultures and things like that. And then of course, as they're going
to
different
TV shows about that.
Right. I wasn't, how TV and media is, it says one thing, but it is like, this is loosely based in reality. And by loosely, it means just a name.
Yeah. We chose a hairstyle.
Yeah. Right.
That's it.
So yeah, I'm sure that there is like a draw of different types of mythology and lore as they're going and exploring kind of this general area. Because I know even local mythology can change from place to place. From we're in the Austin area. I grew up in the Austin area, but from San Antonio to Kyle, we had different mythologies about same places, but different stories about them.
Yeah, and the Wendigo isn't a big thing until you get out towards El Paso, too.
Yeah,
I mean, it's like all kinds of... Anyway, whatever. That's a whole other aside. But
anyways, back to elves. Back to
the Norse. The Nordic people. They have a very rich culture, very rich artistically. And the great thing about them is that they kept good records and wrote down a lot of their stuff. So that's how we know a lot of mythology is through Viking people writing down their myths. So let me jump into this a little bit further. I'm going to pull up my document here. Cool. And so yes, the early elves were not the immortal beings that we think of today. They were abnormally beautiful people, and that was pretty much it. They were light-skinned, just like I said, abnormally beautiful. They had a couple of like magical abilities, but nothing really interesting or things that were worthy of being passed on, I guess. It was sort of mainly around their beauty. And then in some cases early on, there was like this idea of being able to change their form or be invisible. Basically, pass without detection is the early magical ability that I could find.
Yeah.
But the main thing that they did was cause illness. I'm not sure why. That was in several documents that I researched, but there was no explanation of that. Like, in what way do they cause illness? I don't know. So I guess I didn't get deep enough to figure out why they cause illness, but they caused illness. Cool.
Do you know what kind of illness or
no? It just said illness. Every single one. It was like the same word: illness, cause illness. Okay, whatever.
Okay.
I wish they had given me more, but they were. They also, in several instances, attempted to seduce or abduct people. So there was some almost like modern aliens, where there is some probing going on with these elves.
I know when you were telling me, we talked a little bit beforehand. You were like, yeah, they're kind of like a little bit like aliens. I was like, what? What do you mean?
Except instead of being weird, blobby, big-eyed creatures, they are tall and beautiful.
Oh, cool. Copy that.
But much like the Nordic people, they were big on craftsmanship. They were like a proud people. They were very wise. I know that in all the Viking stories I've ever heard, they consider themselves to be one of the wisest people, which I guess you kind of have to have that ego to go in and just destroy other cultures. I mean, you have to feel like I'm right, you're wrong. Why not?
For sure.
So there's definitely like in my research, I feel like there's definitely this idea that the elves are almost this projected self. Like this is who the Vikings wish they were, except for the causing of illness. Again, I have no idea why that's in there. So yeah, like I said, it's a German and Nordic myth. So I feel like it all stormed. That is not what I was going to say.
They all stormed together.
They started with the Vikings, I feel like, because they were the most traveled culture, and it sort of ended up in all these places. So that's the best explanation I could come up with in the amount of time I was able to research. But later, as these myths morphed through history and came together, we had this idea of light and dark elves. So light elves were fair-skinned, and they lived at the far edge of heaven, and they were associated with more of the positive outcomes that you had with elves. So the earlier myths were like, if you ran into an elf, it would be most often in the forest, on your way somewhere when you're alone, as most good myths are. It happens when you're by yourself and you have plenty of time to imagine. So if you ran into an elf, you didn't have any real anything to say that it was going to be a positive interaction or a negative one. Like it could choose to do either.
Gotcha.
But then later on in the myth, we started having this idea of light and dark elves, the light ones being a part of heaven and having more of the positive magical abilities. And definitely the beauty was associated with these light, good elves, these almost like angels and demons version of elves, which maybe it came about the same time Christianity started proliferating, but so it may be associated. Some people say it is, some people say it isn't.
Okay, gotcha.
Anyway, so the dark elves had pitch black skin. They lived in the earth. So it was almost like if it was even, they would come out at night. So it was like almost they were invisible. You couldn't really see them, but you knew they were there. Sketchy elves. But that dark elf myth actually morphed over time into what we think of as dwarves.
That's wild. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Pretty cool. Of the earth and stuff like that. That's wild.
Yeah. Craftsmen, again, that same elven idea of like a proud people. And that's why, I mean, a lot of people have drawn the line between elves and dwarves in modern depictions as being basically the same fantastical race in two different places. And it is. It very much is.
Cool.
Though, in modern depictions, it's of note to say that the dwarves have started embodying again that evil perspective by basically they're digging too deep. They're taking advantage of nature in modern depictions and saying that they are still embodying that in the earth evil. And I think
interesting.
the hobbits, right, that they delved too deep and they got to the heart of the earth, or they delved too deep and found the goblins who swallowed them up. It's like a lot of them are still associated with evil, which is pretty interesting. So there is that.
Cool.
It wasn't till much later in the arc of elves that they started taking on magical abilities like actual invisibility. Like there were some that alluded to basically them being able to get by, have really high stealth checks.
And this is still like in the Nordic and German mythology?
Yes.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. So I believe invisibility happened in the UK. I can't remember. Don't at me for that. But I believe that's where it became a thing. But the UK's mythology is really interesting because I feel like they have a lot of fiddly little creatures that were a part of their lives, like sprites and fairies and gnomes and all this stuff. And they have all of them have the ability to be invisible, I think. I haven't done a ton of research, but I think most of them, it's like either they pass without a trace or they're invisible. And it's just interesting. So invisibility may have been the UK. And then immortality, I couldn't find where that jumped in. Again, that is the fault of my research, not because it's not available on the internet. But immortality was a later thing that came, I think, as a derivation of the fact, not a derivation, whatever, some other smaller, better word, of the fact that they're wise. And it was like defining why they are wise is like, okay, well, eventually the myth turned into needing to explain some of their features. And I believe that's where immortality came from.
Gotcha. That's interesting. I'm wondering how much impact J.R.R. Tolkien had on the way that we perceive elves, and maybe it's the light that we view that. Because like, I think elves are immortal in his world. Yes? No? Maybe so?
They're very long lived. I think, I don't know if they're immortal because I haven't read all the like source material, like Silmarillion or all that stuff, but like,
I started and it was a lot.
The longest lived was like 2,500, 3,000 years or something that I remember in the book.
Okay.
So it's a really long time, but that's nowhere near immortal, right?
Yeah.
So that they live for an age, and it's almost like battle kills off most of the ones that live for a long time.
Yeah. Gotcha.
So yeah, I couldn't.
If we're wrong about Lord of the Rings, sorry.
Dude, let me know though. If I'm wrong about the Lord of the Rings, I want to know.
Yeah.
Some things I don't care. Like Harry Potter, if I'm wrong about that, no offense to anybody, but like, I don't care about that.
You're wild. Absolutely wild.
But other stuff, I do. I know all the stories that we talk about are important to the people who have invested a lot of time in them, and I am not that person for every story. So we're going to have to get along either way.
Yeah, for sure.
So anyway, I feel like the elves have kept to this modern tradition. They've been, more than any other mythical race that I've been able to find, they morph with the times, which makes me feel that they're an older myth than most of them, because I feel like the dragon myth is one of the oldest ones that I know of.
Yeah.
That has morphed with culture, and it's like the modern depictions of dragons are very similar to the older ones. And elves, it's sort of like they take the same course in that they morph over time.
Yeah.
And it's like the modern depictions of elves have like, they live in harmony with the forest. They live in, they're all about the earth and beauty, and choosing beauty over, themselves or the utility of a thing. And I feel like that's in line with a lot of modern ideals and taking care of crops and our future and all that stuff. So I feel like that's interesting.
For sure.
Just an interesting note. And another way for you to morph a race, if you're making it for yourself, is like, okay, well, this is how the idea starts. I think it's easy for a lot of writers to say, this is how an idea starts, and then they just leave that as the myth forever.
Yeah.
Now, instead of saying, okay, well, this is how it started and this is what it was based on. And now 100 years later, what does that look like? Which I think adds a real level of richness to the story.
For sure. A level of intrigue, that keeps people wondering.
Yeah.
Wondering.
You want to confuse people as much as possible when you're telling us. Just kidding. Okay. So
keep them in anticipation.
Yes. But it just gives layers to the onion, right?
Yes, for sure.
So I feel like the elves, like I said, is a projection of Nordic culture, and I think that that's really cool too, because it's if you're making a race and you want to base it off of, we're going to be talking about the utility of a race
Yeah.
in our story later on when we talk about Roween, and I think it's really cool to say, okay, well, what are we basing this race off of? What is the utility in a story?
Hmm.
And then we project the ideal self onto a race.
Yeah.
Because the more we sort of archetype it, and I think that's what's great about elves and dwarves is like, especially after J.R.R. Tolkien, right? That they are such specific mythologies
Hmm.
that we can jump into them. Anybody can jump into writing something like that because they are very, very specific and very streamlined and clean.
Hmm.
So the more you sort of add nuance to the beginning stages of your creation, I almost feel like the less effective it's going to be. So it's like it's about like you want to stack on as much as you can think of at the beginning, that exponential creation method,
Yeah.
and then it's about chiseling away at that like raw block of material until you get something beautiful out of it. So,
For sure.
thank you for coming to my talk on elves.
Yeah, interesting. Very interesting. How they start off and how to create. Again, we're always talking about how to add this into your world and how to put this into your writing or whatever. Just the myth and the fairy tale of it just being out of nowhere and from kind of a more I don't know, recent society. I would say it's not like you said, like dragon mythology is like thousands and thousands of years old. This it doesn't seem to be thousands of years old. At least
Like maybe 1,000 is sort of what it seems like. And
Yeah.
and it seemed to be pretty common. A lot of people reference this. It seemed to be pretty common of like, you're taking a 5-day trip to somewhere.
Mhm.
You load up the wagon, you're going by yourself and you got something to protect yourself and the elements. And you're just out there in the middle of nowhere with nobody around you.
Mhm.
Unlikely that you'll run into anybody. Or at least not for very long. And there were all kinds of stories of just running into strange people in the forest, and
Yeah.
and so it was something that you prepared for on your journeys, right? Like,
It was all just the same guy messing with everyone.
yeah, some just insanely beautiful dude in the forest.
Long flowing hair. He has the right moss to like make it luscious.
The original Hemsworth.
Yeah, right.
That's the real myth we need to be talking about.
Right.
That one has abs.
Oh, that's funny. That's funny. All right, so
Let's get into Dragonborn.
yeah. So I took just one race. Originally, when we kind of split this up, we each had 5 races that we were going to talk about for examples and
silly.
and things. Yeah, no, that was a lot. As soon as we started doing our research, we're like, hey, let's just pick one and we'll talk about that race. And then, like I said, later we'll start the actual creation. So here is the introduction to Dragonborn. First, I'm going to read out of the D&D Beyond, but the player's handbook on Dragonborn.
Can I say something real quick?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so the original idea of the episode was like, I'm going to share a race. We have like, what, 5 or 6 that you can think of off the top of your head that are fantasy races.
Mm-hmm.
And then, lizard people being one. And then there are sort of disambiguations of that, like things that are cross-mated or, like humanoid and something else. So humanoid lizard people, I guess are sort of dragons, but it's like dragon humanoid is what I mean to say.
Yeah.
That's a crossover between 2 fantasy races.
Yeah.
And so anyway, the idea was to go from one that is not human. Obviously, we're familiar with that one. One that is not human, and then one that is a step away even further from that. And then we'll create our own, which is sort of a step away from that.
Yeah.
So that's the idea of the flow.
Gotcha.
Just behind the curtain, I guess. Here we go.
So from D&D Beyond Player's Handbook, the description of Dragonborn. Born of dragons, as their name proclaims, the Dragonborn walk proudly through a world that greets them with fearful incomprehension. Shaped by draconic gods or the dragons themselves, Dragonborn originally hatched from the dragon eggs as a unique race, combining the best attributes of dragons and humanoids. Some Dragonborn are faithful servants to true dragons, others form the rank of soldiers in great wars, and still others find themselves adrift with no clear calling in life. All right, so that is
Bummer.
the Faerun version of Dragonborn. Some of the things I was able to find, or one of the things just interesting here, as you're creating your own race, It said shaped by draconic gods or the dragons themselves. So again, the origin is still kind of unknown. Like I even in my research, I listened to like a couple 30-40 minute videos, and there was still no like clear like this is where they came from.
I
So
straight up thought it was half people, half dragons.
yeah, that's
I was
why
wrong too. Yeah.
when you're saying that, I was like, yeah, that's not what Dragonborn are. So there is a distinction between
You're
Dragonborn.
like, you're about to look so stupid.
There's a distinction between Dragonborn and then half dragons, which are that creation. So half dragons cannot offspring more half dragons. I don't believe so. A half dragon is a dragon and a humanoid creature, because dragons can
That's
take
what I was
the
thinking about.
form of humanoids in mythology, and so that would be when that kind of mating and procreation happens.
That's just an idea I had from Shrek. I don't know.
Yeah.
We've been referencing Shrek a lot. This is
That's it. Yeah.
donkey dragons,
And then
donkeys.
yeah, so Dragonborn are their own race, and if you notice, they do hatch from dragon eggs. So however you want to play that in your game, I don't play it that way. Anyways, so Dragonborn were a playable race in D&D. They're one of the newer races in D&D, and they came about 100 years ago in the mythology, because their mythology is kind of crazy. We talked about half dragons; they're different. And a Dragonborn is its own race. Dragonborn are born of eggs, just like true dragons, and they typically only lay 1 or 2 eggs by age 3. They're the size of a humanoid, 12-year-old humanoid. By age 12, they are considered fully mature, and considered matured, and at age 15, they are considered a full adult in Dragonborn society.
How long do they live?
I think they live like 70, 80 years, something like that, like kind of an average human lifespan.
Why are all these fantasy races? Why do they mature so fast? Like, I didn't look at the lifespan of elves, but I feel like elves are like the exception.
Yeah.
Where it's like maybe they're 50 before they're considered adults or something like that. But it's like, I don't know. All these races is so fast.
I think part of it has to do with their survival process, because when we get into, and I think actually to try and streamline this, didn't talk about their origin, but going into Faerun, the world of D&D, there are 2 planets, and they're like shadow planets of each other through gods and things like that. One is ruled very primarily by wild dragons, and they have draconic empires. There's not a lot of magic there. There's no gods that go there, so there's no clerics, no paladins, or any other type of deity that's there. It is just all power. So I'm sure these Dragonborn needed to survive, had to kind of grow up quicker and mature at a faster rate over the course of thousands of years, where they're only introduced in your typical D&D setting. They've only been around for a little bit of time.
Interesting.
And then once the god of magic died, it started creating portals from different areas around the multiverse, and this planet that had and housed most of the dragons who were slaves, or the Dragonborn who were slaves to these dragons pretty much throughout the entirety of the planet, except for one area which got teleported to your D&D planet of Faerun or Toril.
100 years ago.
100 years ago. Yes,
Nice.
sir. And so what's very interesting about their place, their home on Faerun, is that because they were on like a draconic planet, pretty much, their architect is really wild and very huge. And so their city is just super elaborate. It's kind of wild to look at. I used, I think, Mr. Rex's video on what they don't tell you about Dragonborn, and he talked a little bit about that. And so a lot of cool lore out there for Dragonborn.
Nice.
Anyway, so that's why I think they probably mature a little bit faster. Also, they are of dragonkin, and dragonkin do tend to age kind of rapidly. We talked about the black dragon a little while ago, and how that black dragon, within a few weeks of it being alive, had already taken over a city. So I think they kind of have that maturation process because of the dragons, if that makes sense to you.
Yes.
One of the key things about Dragonborn is that they wear their emotions on their sleeve. They are very honor bound, and they will treat the clan as the most important thing in its life, more important than their own family, their own friends, and their own survival, because of how much they want to contribute to the clan.
That's really interesting for a couple of reasons, but I feel like it's the opposite of lizard people, right?
Yeah.
There's no emotion. You can't tell what they're thinking. Nothing.
Yeah.
And then Dragonborn are like, oh yeah.
Yeah. No, they let you
No
know
mysteries.
what's up. Yeah, exactly. Which is, kind of funny because going through all of this, I'm like, oh, we know someone who plays the Dragonborn and she plays them quite well and to the T when it comes to some of this stuff.
Yes.
And it makes a lot of sense. And it's pretty wild how these kind of like lore and things match up. Yeah, so they're extremely emotional, honor ridden. They don't care too much about the things like the material things in their life. I'm sorry. They care too much about the things in their life.
I was like, that doesn't sound very dragony.
They're the ones that they're gonna find what they're good at and be the best at it. They want to be the best. If they're a protector, they want to be the best protector. If they're a forger, they want to be the best forger. If they're a farmer, they want to be the best farmer, right? So whatever they do they want to be the best for the clan and make the clan exponentially better. And they don't rely on others very well, which again, we have a certain player who does that.
Yes. To a T.
And yeah, but the reason they do it is because they're prideful and they want to show that they're able to be and can contribute themselves in their ideals or whatever they're doing to the clan. One thing I thought was interesting, if you are curious about Dragonborn mating processes, two Dragonborn only come together to mate, and that is the beginning of their marriage. Once the dragon has hatched, they usually again only lay 1 or 2 eggs. So once they've hatched, by the age of 3, once they're this kind of fuller sized Dragonborn, the parents end their marriage, and whatever the sex is of the kid, that parent takes the kid and teaches them how to contribute to Dragonborn society.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So it's a very, I don't want to say very quick marriage, but it is, a short-term thing to produce an offspring. And then again,
it's longer than the average in the US.
Called out.
Extremely long marriage out here. 3 years.
Yeah, right. So, yeah, I mean that was the real quick and dirty with Dragonborn. If you want to,
their marriages.
Hey,
okay, moving on.
Yeah, so they, hopefully I answered some of your burning questions about Dragonborn, but now I have way too much knowledge about Dragonborn. There, one interesting thing that I found in the research, typically Dragonborn are they say inbred, which sounds like a weird thing to say, but it's because of their scales and their colors. So they're all the same species. And this is something we'll talk about later when we're talking about creating your own race. They're all the same species, but they have different characteristics. So you can be a black Dragonborn or a gold Dragonborn, green, red, silver, blue, whatever kind of Dragonborn, and you can mate with another Dragonborn of a different color. And then in turn, that kind of like devalues your scales. And your scales start to get a little bit mixed mash, which is interesting because you as a player or in your story can have Dragonborn who have this kind of, bluish and red scales that are happening, or silver and black. You can mix up the variation of the scales, which I think is super cool. And whatever the draconic bloodline is strongest is what your breath weapon would be.
Interesting.
So, kind of different ways to play it. If you're a player and you want to play a Dragonborn character and you're like, I don't want to just be, a gold dragon or a blue dragon or whatever kind of dragon, you can mix mash your scales and then say like this, obviously talk to your DM, but like this is the strength of my bloodline. So when I use my dragon breath, I actually want it to be like this. And this is,
And if you want to homebrew fire acid breath, go for it, right?
Well, it would still, you're right, but still, it would technically be whichever one is the strongest bloodline.
Or cold lightning.
Yeah. So it's typically
homebrew,
either one or the other.
Non-canonically.
Non-canonically. Yeah. Do you have any issues?
I have so many issues.
Let's talk about them. Do you have any other questions about Dragonborn real quick?
No. I don't, because it's not because I don't have questions. It's because I'm really excited to do our inspiration and get to the creation, like the world building stuff. That's the real reason.
Sounds good. Well,
so for anybody who has questions about Dragonborn, ask them yourself.
Yeah, ask me, because I love dragons and Dragonborn, and so I'm willing and ready to talk about it for a long time.
We out here. So,
sweet. And if y'all want an episode on Dragonborn, just let me know, because I'll get on it.
For real. Let's do our inspiration. Michael, what's been inspiring you, buddy?
So what's been inspiring me recently? Sorry, I had it written down and I was like, which one is it?
We've been structured lately. Aren't you proud of us? 2024. We've been writing them down ahead of time in the show notes, so we don't go, oh my gosh, it happened again. You know, whatever.
Right.
I don't know what that voice was. Moving on. Your inspiration, please.
Yeah. So honestly, it's Coach Bailey's kickboxing system. He's created a whole Bailey kickboxing system, and the way that he has his workouts and his combination structure from the different belt systems, I've really been enjoying taking a look at that, seeing what his process is, and seeing how everything just builds off of each other. And I think it's really great when you look at a creative who has created a foundation, and then from that foundation has created a system to where even the most complex moves or combinations that you're putting together are still all basic foundation moves. And so when you're stringing these things together, I can see when he posts, because I get a little bit of an insight, right? I get to see some of his coaches' workouts, and then I get to see kind of what the advanced workouts are whenever he comes down, and I can just see like, oh, this little intro that you're doing for the coaches that are still, new to kickboxing and things like that. It's like I can see it in this combination and what you're building up to right here. And so a lot of the times when we're talking about like ideas and techniques and things like that, we're able to just build off of it. Even though I don't know exactly what he might be talking about, I generally have an idea of what his system is and then what makes sense, because we both have that foundation. I've been training with him for over 10 years at this point. And so it is, it's really cool to see that, that foundation as a creative, and to actually see him put it into practice, and to see him, most importantly, what all creatives are looking for is to be making money doing that. And he's actually making money with his system. So it is, that has been my inspiration. Obviously I've been trying to, stick with the system as best as I can. So I'm just constantly going over combinations, and, I don't have a lot of people to train with right now, but I'm still just hitting the bag over and over and over again. And then I can just see like, okay, these combinations make sense. I'm working like 5, every time I hit the bag, and just trying to really master those, and the names that he has put with them. So yeah, that's what's been inspiring me, man. Kickboxing, it's always inspiring and always fun to watch.
The mark of a good coach, or, a good story writer, any of it is somebody who makes it easy to fall into.
Yeah, for sure.
And it's almost, it feels like the idea of quicksand, where it's like, okay, I need to make the decision of the first step, and after that, sort of gravity does the rest for me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So, or you could say cliff diving. I guess any of the fallings would work there.
Yeah.
Anyway, good job, BKA. Happy to hear you're doing well.
And Henry's son, what has been inspiring you recently?
Namaste. I'm mixing cultures like crazy. So anyway, my inspiration, I have to read it because I forgot what I wrote, but so there's still some kinks in the process here, but I work with kids and they're constantly pushing what I see creatively. So they both have unlimited confidence in my abilities, and they're also completely unimpressed by whatever I come up with. So it's
heard.
They're all teenagers, so it's like, I mean, that is a natural teenage thing. But it's just interesting because I have to push myself in order to, I don't have to, but it feels like I need to push myself in order to show them new ways to be impressed by themselves and things that they are capable of and that people are capable of. So it's like I'm pushing myself as an artist. Like normally we have art days like once a week or something like that, and I'll sit down and I'll start drawing, and we always have new kids, and they'll be like, "Oh wow, you can draw." It's like, "What do you want to draw?" Or what can you draw a whatever? And I'll draw them something. They put it up in the wall in their room because there's like not a ton of art at these kinds of places. So so I try to give them something, and anyway, it's just really cool seeing what it kicks off for them, because you have kids that are like, wow, this is the greatest thing. I'm putting it on my wall right now. And then there's kids that are like, I could do better than that. I'm like, okay, show me. Like,
Right?
absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely better artists than me. Like, I believe you're one of them. So let's do it. And and they'll sit down, they'll start drawing, and it's like they start figuring things out. And it's like, I've been drawing longer than most of them have been alive. So it's like, obviously I'm going to arrive at a better outcome than most of them. But it's like, it's that set of inspiration that kicks them off. That's really great.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the cool thing is, in life, you set yourself up for these moments that are non-artistic to look at how other people are living their lives and that are further along down the road. It's almost like this respect for elders that I'm getting out of this process, because there's people who have gone through processes 1,000 times that I'm just thinking about going through the first time. And it's given me a perspective of like, I need to sort of let go of that youthful ego of I know best, as I see it play out over and over, and start accepting that a little bit more adulthood humility that allows me to learn from other people. And that also comes from all the research we've been doing for the show too, where it's like I just need to sit and listen and be a student. And maybe that's not a perspective I'll take with me my whole life, but at the same time, it's like this is the season I'm in right now.
For sure.
And there's definitely times when it's appropriate. And this feels like one of those times. So super cool, super inspiring. That learning, I think, is I'm also going back to grad school right now. So I feel like maybe I'm just in a learning season of life, and I'm glad that I'm at that time when I'm going back to school, because otherwise this could be disaster.
Yeah. Solid.
So that's what's been inspiring me this week. I just want to move on from the inspiration and get to Roween.
Yeah. Before we get to our actual creation process of Roween, all right, we're going to have a couple questions that you want to ask yourself, right? So we're going to be using these questions right here. I also, let me see if we used a little bit of we needed some inspiration for these questions that we asked. So I just typed in something about creating fantasy races from scratch, and then it took me to Tumblr. So I believe it's
the FBI shut that down years ago.
Yeah, right. sunnydwrites.tumblr.com, and then she has a post about, or I say she, he, they, whatever. Have a post.
Sunny D.
Yeah, right. Creating fantasy races, an introduction, and she has a couple of questions, or I keep on saying she. I don't know why. Yep, Abby here. Okay, so I'm assuming Abby, she. She has a ton of questions and different ways. If you wanted to go through that, you can go through it. But we had our own little twist to it. But we definitely used those questions, some of those questions, as inspiration. So as we're talking about creating a homebrew from scratch race, first caveat, do what you want to do as far as your creation process. There are different ways to do it. We could do it like Tolkien, where he creates a whole language. And then from that language, as he's creating it, he's like, ooh, elves. Elves are going to speak this language, right? He could have picked dwarves, and it could have been a completely different, One
of my coworkers does languages for his races. Yeah, so he finds the cultural element he wants out of his alien race, and then he finds what race on Earth most aligns with that. And then he starts with their language, and then he breaks down the vowel usage and the letter usage and all that stuff. And then he takes pieces from that, and then he starts making it sound good.
Yeah.
And then he makes rules for how words are made. And then it's literally, if he doesn't have a word for something, it's like a mathematical placement of letters.
Yeah.
And then he just makes a language out of it. And I was like, that is so cool.
That is really cool. So you could be like that and then create your world. I understand if you're not a language person, that might not be where you start off with. Or you could start off where most other people do, and you start off with kind of the idea of the race, and then you can start asking these questions.
And 7 words from the language that you use for the whole book.
Yeah, right.
Definitely seen some of those in my readings.
Yeah, for sure. So I think we have like 13 questions, but right, it's some of them are kind of self-explanatory questions. So we're gonna run through the list real quick of what these questions are.
Go.
So we're talking question number 1. Why are we creating our own race? Obviously, copyright issues, right? You're wanting to create something new and different. If you're using elves or orc or dragonborn, some people might come after you and want that money.
Say it again. Amen. Copyright issues.
Yeah, so that's kind of the biggest one right there. One of the other kind of sub points I put there, there are current races that don't fit the story that you want to tell, or a lot about something and you want to adapt it to something different, right? Like maybe because I did a lot of research on Dragonborn and know a lot about dragons, but I don't want to use the term Dragonborn because I want it to be something different for the readers, then I would kind of use that mythology and some of the culture, but change it up a little bit.
Like, for instance, if you wanted elves to be blue and to be even more connected to nature, so they had a physical part of them that they plugged into plants and things.
Yeah.
And then you wanted to name it after one of the biggest animated series.
Oh.
Just for instance, random.
You're so dumb.
Yeah, I know.
Avatar. You're talking about Avatar, right?
About Avatar, of course.
Okay, so
blue people.
Yes, so that's our first point. We're really not going to come back onto this point. I mean, we will, but again, it's copyright issues. That's our reason. Why is our first question? Why are we creating our own race? Second question we're going to be asking is how realistic do you want this race to be? So that goes back to the language or, whatever. You could spend a lot of time in geography and try and figure out what is the perfect race for this area. And trying to
gritty versus fluffy and all that stuff.
Yeah, you could, or you could kind of create the idea first, but just keep it consistent. I think that's what Tolkien had. You can take a lot from Tolkien. He was a good writer.
Like Urgles versus just like goat people. What's the
Urgles?
Yeah, but like goat people are the same thing. They just fawns. Yeah, fawns.
Fawns, yeah.
It's just like they're not considered warriors, right? And Urgles needed to be warriors.
And fawns are usually like super small, and then Urgles are from Aragon, and they're like super big.
Yeah, big burly. I mean, but it's the same basic thing. They got horns on their head. I know I'm insulting somebody.
I would relate them more to like orcs. Because of their structure, and I think the leg structure be more fawn-ish. Yeah.
I thought they had the weird knees. They don't have backwards knees?
Yeah, that's why I said the legs are like fawns, but like
okay.
the rest of them are like orcs as far as like their culture and stuff like that. Urgles are a race from Aragon. I don't know if
I'm jumping all over the place today. Forgive me.
All right, so question 1, why? Question 2, how realistic do you want the race to be? We're just going to run through these questions here for the rest of it. What is their core value? I think that's something that's super important as we're talking about your race. What is their physical appearance? Obviously, it's going to be a question that you need to figure out for your homebrew race. It doesn't need to be something that's necessarily in this order, but it is something that you should kind of be thinking about. What is the life expectancy of the race, right? This determines a lot of cultural things and cultural factors, rites of passages and things like that. What about this race is a known fact? And then a subtype is, what about this race is a known stereotype, right? Stereotypes are there for a reason. I know a lot of people kind of frown upon stereotypes, but they do have some basis in truth. Not that everyone is this way, but what is their stereotype? I think it's a very interesting way to world build something by asking that question. What is their stereotype?
It's impossible to write a story without stereotypes. I don't think people realize that. For sure. It's impossible.
Yeah, you have to. And yeah, so anyways, that is another question. Are there variations of this race, right? We kind of touched on this a little bit with the Dragonborn and the different scales.
So like Kigyar Ungoy episode, right? Like they have tons of variations. It's because it's a Halo game, so you're playing through and you're shooting different stuff and they get more powerful as you go. But at the same time, there are variations.
Yeah, exactly.
So video games are a good representation of that.
Yep. What are some novelty or abnormal characteristics of your species? I thought that was a very interesting question because I think having some type of abnormality or something novelty can create a little bit more interest in your story. What are some cultural phenomena of your species? What differentiates this race from other races in your world? What are areas of the world they are drawn to? How much interaction do they have with other races of the world? And what are the themes and motifs that you want this race to achieve, which I think is the most important question
By
out of
far.
all of those
By
questions.
far.
Everything else helps you structure that last question. What are the themes and motifs you want this race to achieve? So we ran through those questions, and now let's kind of go a little bit more deep dive into creating your own race from scratch.
Yeah, so I feel like there's a Roween. Okay, so if you're not familiar with Roween, it's this jungle city that we've been world building for months now. Almost all of last year, we spent, once a month or every other month, we spent time world building. We're going to put out a booklet by the end of this year is the plan. So via our Patreon, once we get that up and running, I realized once I rewatched the first episode, that was not super clear. It's not available yet, but hopefully we're aiming for May, I guess. Somewhere between March and May, throwing it up.
Yeah.
And
We're
we'll let
aiming.
you know.
We're aiming for sooner rather than later. But peek behind the curtain. We're having to try and record a lot of episodes because I got some life stuff going on, and so I need to get as many episodes recorded as we can in person because there is going to be a potential that at some point I will not be in the vicinity. So
Gonna have to move to online.
yeah. At some point, so we're trying to get as many of these recordings in as possible, which means some of the things that we want to do are going to be probably starting
Push
that
later.
process in like February or March. And then again, like Henry said, he's going back to school. So this is we have a lot of stuff going on our personal lives as well, but we're trying to get this out because it's something we're passionate about.
It's important.
Yeah. So anyways, Roween.
So it's a jungle city. We have a race that lives there. There's all kinds of lore that we created around the youth in the village, about how they come of age, about how they adventure and play together. And it's a very communal place. A lot of the homes are built by placing boulders on top of tree beds, basically, and the trees grow up around it. And then they sort of mud in the gaps between the trees and then make houses that way. So it's a very if you were walking past it in the jungle, you wouldn't really know that it was there because it just blends into nature. They use all nature to make their houses, and it doesn't look like anything else. So there's a pyramid there that alludes to the dead god that is underneath their village. This is very, very secluded. So there's one other race that they speak to under the mountains. There's a mountain range on the back half of the village, and then on the front half, there's a jungle. So that's as far as really we need to get into for this episode for creating our race. But yeah, absolutely. Like I said earlier, check out the YouTube list. That's the easiest way to find Roween episodes, Creative Thinker Podcast on YouTube. So Roween, that's where we're at. Why are we making a new race? First question.
Yeah, that's right. Again,
Copyright it up.
Copyright issues. And then also, we were looking through the races for on D&D Beyond, and we ended up with Furball. We kind of did that live, and we talked about it, but it didn't necessarily fit what we wanted that place to actually be like. And so that's why we're creating our own race, right? The races that we have here available to us are not available. We didn't like it, so we wanted to change it up a little bit.
It's not of the earth and animalistic enough. Like it's just, and they have their own creation story that just doesn't fit with the world we're making.
Yeah,
and so it's like there's a whole backstory that's like it all just ties into D&D, and the more that we build of this, the less it's connected to D&D. Even though it's something you could definitely play in D&D, or Pathfinder or anything, it's not as grounded in the mythology of D&D.
Yeah, for sure. Obviously, you can take things that are lore and then add them into your world and change it. That's what I tend to do. We've talked about so many different homebrew ways on how you do it, but just none of the races fit. So that's why we're doing this on our own. I think also the creative itch for us is like we wanted to create something new anyways.
Yes.
So that is why we're creating this race. Second question, how realistic do you want this race to be? So Henry, how realistic are we wanting this to be?
I mean, it's definitely going to be a fantasy race. It has to be, right? So it's not like incredibly realistic. It's not going to be like a sci-fi race that it's like, here's what its body is made up of and all this stuff, like down to the chemical elements. But it's definitely should be based on the area around it. It should definitely have some utility. And like I said, I want it to be animalistic and earthy. And so that's already real, right? Like we're talking about a jungle environment. We're talking about a little bit of desert, a little bit of mountains. And it's like, that is already a real place, and I like it to feel like it fits.
Yeah. Yeah.
My
for sure.
perspective. What about you?
Yeah. I definitely think I definitely think there are realistic aspects that you want to keep in play when you're creating a race or an area, because I think that makes it more believable to your audience. So how realistic? It's a fantasy race, right? So some of the elements of our humanoids are going to be fantasy, and some of them are going to be a little bit more realistic. Like, and we'll get into their physical appearance here, and I think that's where we're going to hit a little bit of realism and a little bit of fantasy.
And they're the only ones in the area too. So it's like they have to be specific enough that we can create that effect on the area. Like they've been there for 1,000 years ish, and that makes for a lot of effect on the area.
Mhm.
And so I want to be able to describe that well, which means that they need to be more realistic, or I at least have to be very specific.
Yeah. And I think some of the things that we talked about as far as like the realism, when you're talking about their homes, they're grabbing these boulders, right? And they're putting them in a place where the trees and the vines can kind of grow over them, and they're making these kind of rudimentary houses, and that's still grounded in like we can visualize what's happening here. So that we're making this realistic. And again, you don't have to do that. You can make it whatever it is. I think that's also the lore, the appeal of different systems is, it's supposed to be mysterious and not understood. So, different ways to look at it. So that answers the second question. Ours, 50-50.
Yeah.
What are their core values? If you've listened to any of our Halloween episodes, you have a general idea of what our core values, but let's go ahead and go through their core values a little bit. We just put a couple descriptors here.
Well, I think there's several, but I know we talked about before this that a strong clan identity is cool. I know it's partly because we were talking about Dragonborn, but at the same time, it's like it is also related to the story that we've put in place so far. It's like this is a very secluded community, and it is very much about making that community the best place to live in, the safest place, and giving everybody the longest, best life possible. So it's,
I think when we were talking about it, I was like, well, family obviously needs to be part of their core values, because I feel like any society that like they all have this rite of passage as children, and everyone kind of knows about it, and going to that what was it, the abandoned house area, and they have like the stone that they grab or whatever, that area, and everyone kind of knowing that that's where they grow up. I feel like it brings a stronger family bond and unity together, family structure, and then it creates a strong clan identity.
like it's almost like graduation is now. You know what I mean? It's a celebration by the whole family. But because this is a tribe, basically, it's celebrated by the whole tribe. It's like everybody literally, is going to be there for your ceremony.
Yeah.
Can you even imagine that? Everybody you've ever met is going to be at your graduation or whatever it is.
Well, I mean, you could imagine it, because then you think like everyone you ever met isn't thousands and thousands of people. It's, typically a smaller group of people. So I can kind of imagine it. Like I've been at, senior year football games, and everyone's coming down to go and watch. And afterwards you go and say hi to everyone, and you're saying hi to like, 40, 50 people.
Yeah. Oh, for real.
Yeah. So big family.
so definitely family, clans, part of the same thing. I think piety is pretty huge here, because we've talked about this idea of a dead god that lives, that died underneath the city, not lives. And so
Barely
there's
alive.
this, barely alive, that there is this contrition. That was the word I was looking for. Contrition, that everybody has to go through towards the vines and the things that they deem as being godly. These things have to be obeyed, or have to at least be gone through the ritual of. And so that seemed to be a bigger and bigger thing the more we created. So I think piety's definitely got to be one of their core values. And I feel like because we have all of these stories around their graduation and their place in society, I feel like myths have to be huge. And maybe that's also probably me projecting myself on this, because I love myths.
Yeah.
But I feel like each family unit has such a cool history. Like we've talked about how they're structured versus like if you're going to be a common person versus a very high up person, and how these families go through their rite of passage or become part of the hunting groups and stuff. It's all very much based on your lineage and your family. I feel like myths have to be an important part of, your family, basically. Like it's an oral history that gets passed on to you.
Yeah.
And maybe that's one of the first things you learn
It's like
as an adult.
myths and legends. Because I think that also myths, I feel like, is something that doesn't necessarily incorporate the family lineage, but I feel like legends.
Family history. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, for sure.
But legends would be good too. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a whole other thing that'd be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Because then you can, I mean, there are people like in my family, again, big family, we know, like if we say a certain name, it's kind of elevated on a pedestal because of what they've done for the family and things like that. So I think that would be very interesting to have that also in
like they're telling family history, and then they're like, and then Uncle John, and everybody's like, ooh.
They're like, oh, okay. Yeah, I think that'd be cool. I think it'd be super cool. So yeah, family, and a little bit of religion because they're on the body of a dead god that is taking them over. So that would go to their core values. Obviously, you can make a lot more core values of what your society or races are going to be, like a warrior society, or they're hunter gatherers or whatever. So you can kind of
like their desires, which would be like in this case becoming an elder, the most respected person in the village.
Yeah,
would be huge.
Yeah. Yeah. Sweet. Sounds good. All right, we're gonna move on to physical appearance. So
what you look like.
Yeah. What are these creatures, the species, the race that we're creating?
Dude, we got to come up with a name for this race, dude.
So,
all right,
go ahead and describe it real quick.
So, I feel like what we've talked about is sort of fitting into this jungle, and I feel like it helps to be shorter in places like that because there's a lot of small spaces in the way we've described the jungle to be climbing through. It helps for rock climbing. They're near the mountains. It helps just being a more compact type of humanoid. So I feel like somewhere in the 5 foot to 5'5" range is probably good. Because I want them to be like earthy and animalistic. I feel like animals are incredibly muscular, and I feel like they are very dense. And I feel like definitely the elements are, and I feel like because they're born of this dying god, that there is some energy keeping them alive and maybe what isn't normally alive. And so I feel like if we mix in elements like rocks, maybe in an outer shell sort of thing, sort of like a bug, that their weight goes up quite a bit. So I feel like weighing in at like 280 to 350, somewhere in there, depending on size, is probably more realistic because they have all these, water and rock in their physical bodies that are going to be weighing them down more. It also sort of gives credence to the idea that they can lift these massive boulders with a fairly small population. They're able to carry these boulders and build these homes. And, the animal part makes them agile still, but that just raw physical presence, I think, gives you confidence when you see them to say that they can lift these rocks and do these mechanical things that we've talked about.
Yeah, so
I'm sorry. Some names or something?
Yeah. So here we go, live, right? Names should have been a question that we put on here. You can put it at the end, put it at the beginning. Sometimes it's nice to start off with a name. As he was talking about it, he's saying rock and stone. So I kind of envision a little bit of like a harder or harsher name for the race. So I went through good old fantasy name generator, went through species names and just clicked refresh a handful of times. And I kind of brought us down to 6. So I've got...
What you got?
Cadris, which I was like, oh, that's an interesting species name. The Cadris or the Cadri, something like that.
Cadra,
yeah.
Cadri.
There's Stozote.
That sounds like a fettuccine.
Yeah. Capal. Cabal. It reminds me of like the Cabal from Destiny. So I was thinking Cabal.
Nice, nice.
The Ilago. I like Ilago better if I was gonna go with it, but I'm not vibing with it.
Cadris Alago.
Cadris Ilago. Yeah.
There's a space in the middle. Don't at me.
Solanon.
Solanon.
or
not vibing with that one.
Or if you're Hispanic, Sayan. There's a double L in there. Or I can't say that.
With that last one.
No. It's a Sankuchian. So
maybe Cadrason.
Cadrason.
San Cadris.
San Cadris. The San Cadris. The San Cadri.
Sang Healy. It's like where we're getting what's that second one?
Capal, yeah. Capal.
Capri pants?
We're not going Capri.
Let's go with Cadris.
Cadris. All right.
Cadri. Let's do two I's.
Okay.
Cadri.
I like that. So it is Kadrii. Right? It's official. We've been talking about this species as Furbolg, and now they are the Cadrii.
Kadrii.
Yeah.
Okay, Cadri. Maybe we add an H in there too. Kha.
Sure.
Drie.
Make it hard for the non-English people.
Yeah.
They're like Kahadri.
We could do CH. Make it a G. Jadri.
Yeah, right. So, anyways, you can mess with it, right? That was the one thing that we hadn't had
30 minutes on naming.
Yeah. All right. So, like I said, I think we got through most of the hard questions here. So let's kind of.
Well, let's do the rest of the physical appearance real quick, and then we can zip forward.
Okay, go for it.
I would say life expectancy we already talked about is 180 years, but the physical appearance, I feel like a stone outer shell, but almost like a spongy, porous white rock. Those beach rocks that are almost like old coral or something.
Yeah,
like that's the appearance I'm thinking of. That's almost like sun bleached, but like lighter rocks almost take the color of the light, which is I think a cool idea for living in the jungle.
Yeah.
So like if there's no light around, you're not going to see them anyway. It's just going to be like a regular boulder lying out.
Yeah.
But with the exclusion of some blue stones, I put blue kyanite, which I'm probably butchering the title, but it's a vertical crystal structure rock. And so I figured like just some bumpy areas on the shoulders and like, instead of having that rough skin that we have, that they have those stones. And that would be basically where their magical powers reside and their connection to their god. So like if you endgamed in Rowan, you'd first of all, beefy task.
Yeah.
And second of all, if you did, then and you killed off the rest of this dying god, then that would I don't know, get rid of their magical ability, or what do you think?
Yeah, we were kind of talking about this earlier too. There's either get rid of the magical ability, decrease the life expectancy, create, I don't know, man, like create something that happens where, it's catastrophic, but not immediately. Because I think you even said like, oh, they all die. It's like, well, maybe not that they all die, but like, what is, I don't know. What if they're like their eyes are opened and they are able to explore the rest of the world, and actually like what if every time they try and leave the area of the dead god, the stones bring them back and they're not allowed to leave, and now you killed the god and now this is their expansion into the rest of the world.
Maybe they're almost like they all have to leave on their own, right? Like this very familial society just gets completely destroyed, fractured basically, and then they all become nomads and almost like these deep introspective people that are sad. Yeah. I don't know. It's got to be something like that.
A lot of different things that you can put there. Put their weaknesses.
Ooh, yeah. And maybe we can fast forward from there if you like.
Yeah, just because of time. But yeah, we obviously this is not an easy task to create your own race, especially answering all these questions. So
especially with the world already made. I mean, it's so complicated just based off of what we've done. I mean, we've done a lot.
Oh yeah,
to be fair,
sure.
But at the same time, it's like the more you do I wouldn't say it hems you in more, but it's like the rules dictate the area of creativity, and the more it's dictated, the harder it is to just sort of quickly pull things in.
So another question we asked: what about this race is a known fact? So what is a known fact about the cadre?
Where are we at?
F.
That's what I was thinking. I don't know. I feel like it's got to be something around the fact that everybody has it's got to be like they all have their own secrets. And because in small towns and cities, it's like there is known secrets that everybody has. And it's sort of like, I feel like there's this idea that if somebody's telling you the truth, they're lying to you. In this village, because everybody is so close knit. It's like everybody has quote unquote secrets, and maybe like 10 people know it.
Right.
Which means everybody knows it, right?
Yeah.
It's just like less talked about the further you get away from the secret. So I feel like there's got to be some stereotypes there. There's also got to be some around the kids that go through. We're calling it Rumble Rock right now because I can't remember the title.
Yeah. Sorry. Shout out to Rumble Rock from my D&D group. Totally stole the name.
So like a kids council kind of deal where they go someplace to talk and hang out and do their adventures. But it's like almost like if you didn't do well in Rumble Rock, that there is a stereotype about those people that they become even less beneficial to society the longer,
Yeah, they have to like work harder to contribute to the clan or whatever.
Yeah, because they made some bad decision when they were like 6.
Yeah.
So I feel like those are some good stereotypes. And then like maybe I don't know. There's all these stereotypes. The more I get into mythology about redheaded people, because they're pretty rare, and so I almost wonder if there's like some adaptation of like maybe they come out with green crystals instead of blue.
Yeah.
And those people are like the pariahs. It's like maybe early on in the village there was human sacrifice of them, like they used to do with redheaded people.
Yeah.
And just stuff like that. Maybe there's like some.
Yeah, that makes sense. Or like green or like purple, because like I know purple's a theme or at least I feel like it's a theme of color amongst the dead god and of the vine and things like that, or whatever the color of the vine is. They come out that color. It's like, ooh, you're destined to be sacrificed.
Yeah, like they're almost more or less luster, a little less glow. Dim people. There's a lot of synonyms you could use.
Yeah. So speaking of that kind of leads into our next question. Are there variations of this race? I know that we talked about, when you showed me the picture of what you were kind of thinking, I was like, yeah, but we also remember we talked about like this warrior race that kind of embodies the kind of like Jaguar-esque of the elements of the jungle. So I think, yeah, sure, why not have variations? Why not have a couple different colors? But of course, some of them might mean something like we said, blue or purple might mean you're not long for this life.
And then like taller means you're a warrior,
or more likely to be.
And I feel like did I mention like if they're rock people, mainly rock people, and then there's these stones on the joints. Like I think there should be fur too, like something that connects them to like jaguars and stuff. Like just
we talked
like
about
hair on top and stuff.
Oh
like,
yeah,
like
for sure.
Hairy arms, maybe. You know what I mean? Like just like fur patches.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit more feline, maybe the shape of the face too. But anyway, that's a little bit of a subject change.
Yeah, no, I'm trying to think like what if like there's like I don't know. I don't want to like dissect the species into like certain classes or sex already, but like what if there's one that the hunters typically have that more kind of feline features in the face, or they're a little bit slimmer because that makes for hunting easier. You're less likely to stumble into the dangerous plants that are in the jungle, or less likely to spook the animals that you need. Also, meat eaters, they're rock people, but they need to eat meat.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
I think maybe if there is like some adaptation of like once per generation, somebody is born with, or once every other generation or something, that there's somebody that is born covered in fur completely, and that is like their one of their legends of like an ordained person to lead the tribe, something like that.
Yeah.
Because obviously we have our own mythology in the stage of time we're at, but like if we're adding legends, then maybe we've got like whatever his name could be, and whenever he or she is born, then they're the leaders. I don't know, like maybe they believe in some reincarnation or something because of the vines.
For sure. So
variations, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you want to kind of lean towards that. I think it adds a little bit more spice to life, and it makes it easier for you as a creator to add more variations of the race. Maybe even just like 2 or 3, right? We talked about the jackals and grunts, the Oingoy and Kigyar, in one of our I think the timeline that might be coming out next week.
Yeah, but we're batch processing, so when this one comes out, it's gonna be way later.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So we talked about Ongoy and Kigoy.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah. Anyways, they each had like 3 or 4 different own variations, and that is a work that has been out for 20 years now at this point, and there's still only 3 or 4 variations, and that's like intergalactic space travel. So in your world, 2, 3, is going to be good enough, and it's going to add enough variation. I think back to Aragon talking about Urgles. There's Urgles, and then there's like the Kroll, I think is what they're called, or Cole, where it's like the one step up, and they're the ones that are like the super beefy people.
Yeah. Novelty or abnormal characteristics. I feel like we've talked about some of those.
Yeah. So we kind of that's the great thing about this is some of these questions kind of lean into each other, and as we talk, we can kind of answer these questions as we're talking to. But yeah, obviously we talked about what is abnormal. What if there are these mainly rock people and they have a fur person, or they have a green person, or a blue person, right? What does that mean in your world? And what role do they play in your culture?
And some cultural phenomena of your species. We talked about Rumble Rock, and we've talked about how people become warriors, and we've talked about their armor and their family history. I feel like all those are pretty unique to a race.
Yeah, for sure. What differentiates this race from other races in your world?
Like, so they're not really elemental, they're not really tabaxi, but you could say that it's a cross between elementals and tabaxi.
Yeah. That definitely makes them different. Of course, if you're adding this in let's just say a D&D world, you would be like, I don't know what these creatures are, because they're, like I said, they're kind of rock people that are eating meat because they still need, the sustenance, the protein, and things like that. And my characters would probably be like, what is happening here?
Like almost like if you hit them enough that the rocks break, it's almost like blood comes out. You know what I mean? Like it's just a weird, it's not like they just turn to ash or something. I feel like the elders, like the mark of elders is that they have like moss growing on them. You know what I mean? Like the older you are, the more moss you have, and it's almost like turns you into almost like a stump looking creature. Anyway.
So I think that's a big difference already from this race to the other races or species in the world, because there are some things that you can be like, they kind of look like cat people, but they're kind of like not at all. What areas of the world are they drawn to? Of course, for us, it's pretty easy and simple to say they're drawn towards the jungle. They're drawn towards Rowan. I think you put down because the high moisture environments, rocky areas, of course. But think about what your species, are they drawn more to the ocean? Are they drawn more to the mountain? What about them has made them survive in the area that they're in, and why are they drawn to that area? Is it food? Is it, water? Typically, being around water, if you are creating a species that lives with the same kind of boundaries that we as humans live with, obviously making a species near water is important for survival. So that's a pretty easy one to go with.
Yeah, for sure. And they literally have dry skin, right? If it's rock skin, it's literally dry. So they've got to be around constant moisture so that they don't just dry out and get ashy or whatever.
Yeah. How much interaction do they have with other races of the world?
Not very much, other than, we talked about drow in the episode, right? Where it was like, they have drow that come in and trade with them from time to time, but it's, it can be a different race too, but they have one race that they trade with occasionally, and it's like their cultures are so different that they only trade out of like necessity. They met each other, they're wary about it, and it's sort of like they found a way to be mutually beneficial to each other. And that's about it. Like they don't want to get to know each other at all. It's just like, here's this. Can I have that?
Yeah. Yeah. And then last but not least, episode's gone a little long. We apologize. But
oh, you love it. You
what
love
are
it
the
out
themes and motifs you want this race to achieve? What are the themes and motifs that you want your own home brew from scratch race to achieve? Henry, what do we want this to achieve?
Well, my impression at this point is like, story wise, this is the family dynamic. This is like, it's almost like going into people's trauma, right? Like, that they have, everybody has their good experiences with family and their bad.
Mhm.
And this race is a great way to explore that. You know, it's not like, if you wander into an Elven encampment, it's like, I'm here to learn. These people have been around forever. They're great craftsmen. Like, I just want to pick up a few things before I go.
Mhm.
If you're in with the dwarves, it's like, I want to have a really big feast. We're going to party well. And maybe I get to explore some caves. Like, that's going to be dope.
Mhm.
But most of that is like, I mean, if I'm not a dwarf, I know I'm going to get into some conflict because they're going to think less of me,
Mhm.
stuff like that. Where like this is, if you manage to be a part of the tribe, you're a part of the family. And then that's when the real craziness starts.
Yeah.
And so I feel like it is a stand-in for any what seems like healthy family, and it also is a stand-in for any village or we call it non-advanced culture.
Mhm.
So it could be the Aztecs, it could be American Indians, it could be anybody.
Yeah.
And any of those rituals would probably fit with this race. So it's sort of like a step back into ancient culture and a step back into a more intense family group.
Mhm.
So I feel like those are the
Solid.
two stories you could tell really well with this
Yeah.
race.
I dig it.
The Cadre.
Cadre. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think that answers all 120 questions that we had. Thank you for coming along our journey.
One per minute.
Is there anything else you wanted? Yeah, right. Is there anything else you wanted to add to the episode before we wrap up?
Yeah, so I think we talked about researching races and at the beginning, and that's important. The research is something that we're doing more and more for the podcast to make this a richer experience for you, but it's also to sort of tickle that part of your brain that says, maybe I should go do research as well. And I think whenever you're setting about your creative process, if you just hit that inspiration and you put everything down on the page, that's great too. But then go do your research after, because it really helps you stay away from other tropes, and it really helps you land in something you're interested in instead of creating a world that you're sort of locked out of once you make it. So like for this group, again, like I wouldn't tell a dwarven story in this group.
Yeah.
Because I'd be locked out of that almost, they don't even live in caves. So how am I going to do that? Right.
Yeah.
So if you're creating something for a specific reason to tell a specific story, then you want to make sure you've done your research on which tropes work in different places and which ideas will help pull you forward instead of restrict you. I think that's important. So that's why we structured the episode this way. Thank you for joining us. Did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just typical, channel stuff. Please like, subscribe. I know we have a lot of people that do listen and watch. If you could share our videos, even to one or two people, we would really appreciate it. We are trying to make 2024 a really huge year for the Creator Thinker podcast. We're trying to add a lot more stuff to it, but like we said in, I want to say the first episode that came out this year, just a little clip and preview into the episode. We put a lot of time and effort and energy into this, and we have a lot of life stuff going on, and typically our 1 of 2 days off are here. And that means we typically have 1 day off because we spend a lot of time recording, and we do a lot of sessions all at once. So we really appreciate everyone who listens to us, but please try and support us in the other ways, sharing our videos and liking. You hear YouTubers all the time saying it helps the algorithm. It does. It really does. Seeing it from our standpoint, it really does get more traction to the videos. And our traction, we already have like kind of a small group of people who are watching. If we can just increase it, it would help us a little bit. We do enjoy it, but it would also be some great feedback to see a number count go up above 30 or 40 views on per video, because the quality I feel like that we're putting out in video and in message, it seems to be good quality. And it seems to stem some really good conversation, at least between my friend group. So if you guys can just like, share, subscribe, that gives us a lot of extra perks that we can use, at least for YouTube, and I'm sure it will help on Spotify and other apps as well.
And we're newish to YouTube, so we've got a goal for this year of trying to get to 500 subscribers by the end of the year. So if you have multiple channels, subscribe on all of them. If you can send them to anybody you know, subscribe. And if you don't have time to listen, but your computer's on, just hit play.
We would really appreciate that.
Anything you can do. We really do appreciate you. Creative thinkers all across the globe. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.